Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar on the 5 key steps to Cyber Essentials certification. Some housekeeping before we start. You will have noticed that you're all on mute. That's a deliberate step we take in order to reduce the background noise and interference and disruption. Gives everybody a better experience. There will be a recording of the webinar. It will be made available to everybody on the webinar over the course of the day or two after the webinar. And if you find that you have questions that you would like us to answer as I go through this webinar, please do type them into the Q&A option in your control panel, either the Q&A or the chat option. If you type the questions in there, when we come to the Q&A section towards the end of the webinar, then I'll pick up any questions there have been. I'll share the question with everybody in the audience and then attempt to provide a sensible answer to it. In all, today's webinar is designed to be a maximum of an hour, about 45 minutes or so of me sharing information with you, and then up to 15 minutes to answer any questions which you may have. So that's the plan for the next hour. IT governance, we are your host, as you know. We've been a Cyber Essentials certification body ever since the scheme was first launched way back. It seems like years and years ago. It's probably only about 5 years ago. But we've been a certification body through both of the iterations of the scheme. We probably handled more individual certificates than any other organization in the UK. Certainly more than 5,000 Cyber Essentials certificates we've handled. We're also, apart from being an IASME accredited Cyber Essentials certification body, we're a CREST accredited penetration testing and incident response services provider, and across the group we have a broad range of services which are designed to enable organizations to put together an integrated approach to cyber defense in depth, which draws across the broad range of governance, risk management and compliance solutions that organizations need in order to deal effectively with today's increasingly sophisticated and completely reliable cyber threats. They are not going to go away. They simply become more and more effective with every week that passes. I'm Alan Calder. I'm the founder of IT Governance. Some 20 years ago, I set it up. I'm now also the chief executive of GRC International, which is the parent company of IT Governance. I've been involved in the industry for a substantial period of time. I've written a number of books around cybersecurity and the governance of IT. My background is a management one, not a technical or legal one. So most of the information and guidance that I provide comes from a business perspective rather than from a more narrow, very specific technical or legal perspective. The technical and legal aspects are a very important part of an effective business response to the challenges that we face in today's business environment. The agenda for today is to have a look at Cyber Essentials, why it might be critical for organizational survival in 2023, the benefits of certifying to it, the controls which the CE scheme covers, the difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, a simple 5-step methodology to getting to Cyber Essentials certification, and then some of the options around how you can go about preparing for and achieving Cyber Essentials certification. And then live Q&A, as I said at the beginning. So do, if you have any questions right now, please do put them into the Q&A or into the live chat or into the chat options in your GoToWebinar control panel. So what is Cyber Essentials? Cyber Essentials is a framework of 5 basic technical cybersecurity controls. It's a scheme put together by the UK government. They continue to back and support it, and it's designed to help organizations of all sizes protect themselves against the most common internet-borne cyber attacks. So it's a point-in-time self-assessment. You're going to, as an organization seeking Cyber Essentials certification, you're going to assess your own compliance with the requirements of the Cyber Essentials scheme. If you're looking for a Cyber Essentials Plus certification. There will then be a set of tests, technical tests, which are designed to establish that your self-assessment is correct, and there will be a verification of your self-assessment by one of our highly trained and experienced assessors. Those are independent. In other words, we don't prepare you for certification. We can tell you what you need to do. We can test whether you've done it or not, but we can't do the work ourselves and then test that it's been done appropriately. That's known as marking one's own homework. So as an independent certification body, we're very clear about identifying what you need, sharing with you what has to happen, where you need help and support. We can provide help from elsewhere inside the organization who can help you understand what it is that you need to do in order to meet the compliance requirements. Cyber Essentials is a yearly certification scheme. The certificate expires 12 months after it's been granted. The obligation to have it continues, and that's why we provide, as an organization, Cyber Essentials certification on a subscription basis. It means that we start putting in place the elements that prepare you for your recertification ahead of time, so that you can be sure that your Cyber Essentials certification, which is essential in so many different ways, I'll touch on those shortly, is able to continue uninterrupted from the first moment that you have it in place. But while Cyber Essentials is a yearly point-in-time updates and recertification, it's not enough on its own. You need to put more in place on a continual vigilance and monitoring basis. In other words, however good your security is today, things might change in 3 months or 6 months' time, and your recertification falls due, and in that point you might find yourself falling prey to a cyber attack. Cyber Essentials is also a technical security certification, so it doesn't deal with issues like human susceptibility to being scammed or phished, and there are elements that you should be dealing with to make sure that you have a broader range of security in place than simply the core Cyber Essentials. So Cyber Essentials, it's a point-in-time technical security set of controls. Organizations can be certified to one of 2 levels, and that's either Cyber Essentials, which quite often is called Cyber Essentials Basic, but Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. And I'll look shortly at in a bit more detail at what each of those 2 elements involves. The benefits of Cyber Essentials certification for most organizations start with the fact that it's a requirement for you to be able to bid for a government contract, or increasingly for contracts from private sector organizations, where having a Cyber Essentials certificate is a prerequisite for being included on the RFP or tender or bid list. But it goes further than that. And you should think of Cyber Essentials not simply as being something you do in order to get onto a tender or RFP list or to maintain a contract. Because what Cyber Essentials really does do is give every organization a basic level of cybersecurity. It protects against around 80% of common internet-borne attacks. In other words, it's not dealing with all of the sophisticated attacks that cyber criminals might run against your organization, either targeting you or much more likely targeting vulnerabilities that all organizations have got, but it will deal with the vast bulk of common internet-borne attacks. As I said, those attacks change, vulnerabilities change, and so the importance of putting in place continual monitoring, vulnerability scanning and protection in the 12 months between your point-in-time tests is an essential element of a good cybersecurity strategy. But Cyber Essentials is giving you the information as a management and your stakeholders that at this point in time, you are protected against a set of the most common cyber threats and cyber dangers. You get a number of other spin-off benefits of Cyber Essentials certification. Apart from the fact it's obviously a pragmatic first step to building a cybersecurity resilient framework, but it also means you're on the list of the National Cybersecurity Centre and IASME directories of organizations that have been awarded Cyber Essentials certification. That's an extra bit of of credibility for the organization. If you are an organization that's implementing or has implemented ISO 27001 and 27002, Cyber Essentials can help you meet the compliance requirements of 27001 and implement the ISO 27002 controls. So it becomes a very effective way of reassuring customers and other stakeholders that you are taking technical cybersecurity seriously. Structure, NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, has a mission of protecting the UK from cyber attacks, making it one of the safest places in the world to do business and operate online. And it created the Cyber Essentials scheme. It maintains it. It continues to do the work around ensuring that the technical controls are appropriate, the skills required of assessors are very clear, and that's a really critical element of the, if you like, the credibility of Cyber Essentials is that it is an NCSC-sponsored scheme. IASME is the NCSC's Cyber Essentials partner. They're responsible under contract to the NCSC for delivering the scheme, so they license certification bodies such as IT governance. They also train and license assessors, and all of our assessors go through that training in order to for us to meet the requirements for us to be a certification body. We have to have a number of assessors who meet specific requirements, and so the licensing is put in place through IASME. So that's the, if you like, the formal corporate background that sits behind the Cyber Essentials scheme. Cyber Essentials is part of a cyber defense in-depth strategy. There's no one who will tell you that Cyber Essentials on its own is a silver bullet that protects you from cyber risk. It doesn't. It deals with 80% of internet-borne risks, but what you should be doing is building it into a much more substantial cyber defense in-depth framework. Cyber defense in-depth is how, as an organization, you build the kind of resilience that enables you to deal with today's increasingly sophisticated cyber attacks in a way that means you can concentrate most of your energy and effort on what you sell to your customers rather than worrying about cybersecurity or even having to respond to a cyber breach. Cyber defense in depth has 5 steps to it: detection, protection, management, response, and recovery. Cyber Essentials fits very solidly into the protection components of that. And as you can see on the slide I've just put up, the second line of a cyber defense in depth strategy includes Cyber Essentials, security trained IT support, effective incident reporting, incident response, so that when there is something that looks like a breach, people across the business know what to do and how to deal with it, who to report it to, you know how to deal with the breach, how to build it into your security posture and to strengthen that. But the front line in any cyber defense in depth posture is a combination of continual vulnerability scanning and authentication policy and phishing staff awareness training. Remember that a cyber criminal only has to be successful once. They just need one person to click on a link that they shouldn't trust. They need just one vulnerability in your infrastructure, and that means that they can take your entire organization offline. And the headlines are full of organizations who are in that position or going through that right now. Something like 54% of organizations in one survey I saw this morning admit that they suffered a GDPR breach as a result of the cyber breach in the last 12 months. Serious issue. The cyber defense in depth then looks at, as you get the basics in place, broadening it out with frameworks like ISO 27001, supply chain security management, business continuity, and then disaster recovery and cyber insurance. And you should think of cyber insurance, frankly, as simply a method of dealing with the impact of a successful cyber breach. It's not a cybersecurity control, and increasingly you will not be able to get cyber insurance unless you can demonstrate that you have in place a solid range of cybersecurity controls, including elements like Cyber Essentials Plus, and a number of other components. So Cyber Essentials, if you like, one of the most important elements of a cyber security defense in-depth framework. If as a management you're asking yourself questions like, what are the top risks facing our organizations? Are we testing our systems before a problem arises? You can answer a number of those questions simply by having a Cyber Essentials certificate. The kinds of issues, particularly Cyber Essentials Plus certificate, the kinds of issues that more and more managements ask themselves as they wake up in the morning and read about yet another successful cyber attack on another high-profile organization, or they hear about another small organization which has lost substantial amounts of money through a successful cyber attack. When did we last test our recovery procedures? Do we have an effective information security awareness program? Are all part of the broad, are we adequately cyber secure? Are we adequately resilient? And being able to put your finger on a Cyber Essentials, preferably a Cyber Essentials Plus certificate, enables you to go insofar as that core area of technical cybersecurity controls are concerned, to go, yes, here in this way we are. So what controls are covered by Cyber Essentials? And there are 5 really, and I'm linking each of them to a control in ISO 27002 at the same time. The first cybersecurity control is secure configuration, is the idea that your internet-facing, both external and internal devices, should be configured securely so that there are no opportunities for cybercriminals to be able to access information or to be able to access capabilities that they shouldn't be able to do. The boundary between the devices inside your organization and the internet should be very clearly controlled. There should be a firewall which is appropriately configured. There should be internet gateways. All of those should deal in a way that is appropriate with the risk of data passing through, of attackers being able to get through firewalls, of inadequate differentiation between networks. All are components of this single control. And that control, boundary firewalls and internet gateways, is part of 4 separate controls in ISO 27002, each one of which is part of the technical, in ISO 27002, the technical suite of controls. The third is access control. The logic of access control is that you should determine who can access what information on the basis of who has a business need to access it, and if there isn't a business need, people shouldn't be able to access it. It's more complicated than that, because of course you want to be sure that people who have special privileges, like administrators, aren't using their administrative privileges for anything other than administrative tasks. They shouldn't be using administrative privileges in a way that enables an attacker to be able to take over that account and use that capability to move horizontally inside a target network. Patch management, in a way, is one of the most important controls. Most attacks target vulnerabilities in one of 2 areas. In people's susceptibility to click on a link to provide information when they shouldn't, or a vulnerability in software where a vulnerability has been identified, it's published on a website, as all vulnerabilities are, that enables attackers to work out how to target vulnerabilities. And vulnerabilities typically occur in millions of websites, so that an attacker can craft an attack, and the cyber threat environment is now very sophisticated, where you have people who will build an attack, they'll rent it out to people who specialize in gaining access to networks. They will collaborate with people who specialize in exfiltrating data from networks. They might collaborate with other people who specialize in dealing with a ransomware demand. But a single vulnerability, either in a human being or in your software, could enable an attacker to deploy ransomware across the network, which might cost you your life as a business, might cost you many weeks of time as you try and rebuild and recover, could cost you substantial amounts of money, increasingly which will not be covered by cyber insurance. So patch management, probably the most important technical control. And finally, the 5th of the technical controls, malware protection, making sure that you have appropriate anti-malware, anti-malicious software protections in place across all of the devices that will identify and deal with common malware, stop it executing, test your devices to make sure that it's dealt with. And not all anti-malware software is 100%, which is why you need to have a defense in depth. Most anti-malware software will deal successfully with around 40% of known vulnerabilities. It deals with the most common ones. There are new ones coming out every day. So malware protection that's updated on a regular basis and that is part of a broader defense in depth is a key element in long-term survival. So those are your 5 key Cyber Essentials controls. Those are the links to controls in ISO 27002, which of course also become the controls in Annex A of an ISO 27001-2022 information security management system. Cyber Essentials does more than give you the tools to comply with guidance in ISO 27002. It also enables you to comply with requirements in Clause 4 of ISO 27001. So in other words, you shouldn't think of Cyber Essentials on its own. It's a certification which delivers protection against 80% internet-borne attacks. You shouldn't think that's all there is to it. It does more than that. Clause 4 of ISO 27001 requires organizations to implement security measures that meet business, contractual, and regulatory requirements. Cyber Essentials is a contractual requirement for many organizations and many contracts. It also enables organizations to demonstrate that they are meeting the requirements of GDPR, that cyber defenses are state of the art. And so CE certification is an effective way of demonstrating that you are in compliance with Clause 4 of ISO 27001. As I say, that's relevant if you have implemented ISO 27001, as more and more do. ISO 27001 is an externally certified governance, risk management, and compliance framework, whereas Cyber Essentials is an externally audited technical security framework. So when you put the two together, it demonstrates to stakeholders that you have a robust security stance. You've gone beyond either just governance, risk management, and compliance, or just technical controls to put in place something which gives you a robust cyber defense in depth. So it's a minimum baseline security and assurance to stakeholders, while Cyber Essentials is, while ISO 27001 builds on it to demonstrate effective risk management and identify and demonstrate a commitment to continuous improvement in terms of information security. And believe me, with the speed with which cyber risk evolves and cyber threats develop, continual improvement is a fundamental component of survival in today's environment. Implementing Cyber Essentials in conjunction with ISO 27001 enables you to enhance the basic security controls that Cyber Essentials gives you, tie it into staff training, incident response planning, ongoing vulnerability scanning, all of the components of a multi-layered defense that is effective in mitigating cyber risk. So Cyber Essentials enables you to meet legal compliance requirements. It eliminates the need quite often for additional information security audits because you can present your cyber security certificate. It probably helps you meet contractual requirements if you have contracts that require CE certification. And as a management, it gives you an independent view about the quality of security. And I've got to tell you that most of the organizations who come to us on the first time, we deal with them either to verify a Cyber Essentials self-assessment or to test a Cyber Essentials Plus, have one or more areas in which they do not meet the requirements. In other words, individually, the organizations think they do, but subject to external testing, they're not. So I can only say to you that the value as a manager of Cyber Essentials certification is that it gives you independent view as to the quality and robustness of your cybersecurity controls. And believe me, you do not want to find out that they weren't that robust because you have a successful breach. You're much better off going through the pain of testing today, making sure that your controls are effective, than waiting until the point at which you have a breach, because the pain, the disruption, the expense of trying to recover are so much in excess of the minor pain of getting CE certified. So certainly Cyber Essentials helps improve security culture and structure. It protects, enhances reputation, and competitive advantage is one of the benefits that more and more organizations get from being able to demonstrate robust cybersecurity. So I've talked about Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. What's the difference? Cyber Essentials is the basic approach. It's a self-assessment. You do it yourself. You fill in a questionnaire. You can't pick and paste answers. You've got to put in your own answers. So it forces you to think about what the answer to the question is, and that's independently verified. Independently verified means that one of our trained assessors will go through the answers and consider whether they make sense or not. They'll draw on a lot of experience in their training and go, well, that seems like a sensible answer. We'll accept that. That doesn't seem like you've understood the question. You need to go away and think about it. But it's simply a verification of your self-assessment. You are assessing yourself against the 5 key controls. It's not a test or an audit of your compliance. And we find many organizations who move on from Cyber Essentials to Cyber Essentials Plus, when we test them, they didn't know enough about what they needed to have done to meet the Cyber Essentials requirements at the self-assessment stage to have been genuinely secure. So it's a good step, Cyber Essentials, but it's really not enough. Most organizations should be making the additional investment to move into Cyber Essentials Plus. Cyber Essentials Plus goes beyond a verification of your self-assessment. It carries out a number of tests to make sure that your assessment of your compliance is actually as good as it can be. So there's a technical audit of your systems carried out by our team using our software. There are a number of contracts that will require Cyber Essentials Plus certification, including MOD work, handling personal data. And Cyber Essentials Plus, as the name suggests, can only be achieved once you've done the basics of Cyber Essentials. So the process is you'd apply for Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Cyber Essentials, you'd complete self-assessment. Within 3 months, you need to then subject yourself to the set of Cyber Essentials Plus tests. Making sure that you've got it all right is the important thing to do, because you don't want to find yourself up against it, trying to get Cyber Essentials Plus and you run out of time. There is a very strict, must pass the test within 3 months of passing the basic certification. So that's the difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. Plus is Cyber Essentials self-assessment plus independent technical tests to verify your compliance. The NCSC requirements are set out in writing. There's a link in the slide, and these slides will be circulated that enables you to look at what the requirements are. And we would encourage all organizations to read the guidance before starting the questionnaire. You get access to the questionnaire when you sign up with us to do Cyber Essentials. You can do the questionnaire online. That way we can manage all of the back and forth much more effectively. We can get it submitted to IASME, who's the who accredits us as a certification body. We can manage that whole process electronically, but it is a questionnaire that you've got to complete yourself on the basis of your own understanding of the NCSC guidance and of the controls that you have in place. Over the years, we've developed a 5-step methodology to achieving a Cyber Essentials certificate. And obviously, what it comes down to is effective cybersecurity, because that's the be-all and end-all of CE. So it's about protecting your infrastructure, making sure that there are genuine firewalls in place between your equipment and the internet. And a genuine firewall includes even if you have only one laptop in your organization, because Cyber Essentials is designed for organizations of any size, one person up to hundreds of thousands of people. The principles are the same, the protection is the same. It's just more complicated to do if there are a lot more devices in the organization. Make sure the default passwords, so secure configuration, make sure default passwords are changed. And if you have if you've deployed a firewall or a browser or any other device that you no longer have the default password provided by the manufacturer enabled, you change it to something which is secure, which is significantly long and is going to protect you against the possibility of being breached. You remove access rights to areas that people do not need to access, by making sure that security settings are limited to the business activity you need them to be. you need to control access to information so that it really is built around need to know, both in terms of information and in terms of systems, restricting admin, restricting privileges, making sure people don't have the power to do things on your system that they don't need to have. Protecting against malware, putting anti-malware software in place, protecting email services, web browsers, dealing with the possibility of code execution in a web browser, and of course patching everything, keeping devices up to date, making sure you're only using supported software. Don't use software that is out of date. So the big breach of the National Health Service a couple of years back was because they were using Microsoft software that was out of date, had been out of date for a long time. Microsoft had made special arrangements to try and support it, but it was no longer supported, and the NHS simply hadn't upgraded. And that made it really easy for cyber criminals to deploy an attack across the whole of the NHS that was affected. So you should have no software that is beyond end of life. So Cyber Essentials is about making sure you've got those controls all in place. But the first step in a Cyber Essentials certification is to determine what's going to be in scope. Scope is the key step, because that's what you've got to be clear about in order to make sure that all the devices that are in scope and all the software that is within scope meets the key conditions. And the key conditions are that the devices in scope, can they accept incoming network connections from untrusted internet connected hosts, or can they establish user-initiated outbound connections to devices via the internet, or can they control the flow of data between any of the above devices and the internet? Those are the key tests for devices that you think are within scope, and you want to make sure that you've identified the scope of your Cyber Essentials certification really clearly. All CE applications will include one or more end-user devices in the scope. There's no way you can avoid that, because there are one or more end-user devices which are being used to move data to operate within scope. And this diagram is a kind of simplistic overview of the elements that might be in scope for a Cyber Essentials certification. It's going to vary substantially organization by organization, because different organizations have different configurations, different ways in which they're organized, but you need to be able to get very clear what your scope is. It's one of the areas that in your self-assessment is going to need to be clearly set out, and particularly for Cyber Essentials Plus will be tested. So we'll need to be able to be clear that everything that is within scope is what should be within scope. So scope is step one. Step one in a 5-step procedure. The second step, once you know what is in scope, is to implement the 5 CE controls. Make sure that you're doing all of the 5 things that CE requires you to be doing. Then complete the self-assessment questionnaire. Completing the self-assessment questionnaire, you'll probably find a number of things where you go, not quite sure what the answer to that is, not sure if we're doing that. So you need to go away and do all of that. You need to make sure that you remediate, so that by the time you complete the self-assessment questionnaire to submit it for verification, it's as good as you can get. What you don't want to have is have our assessor go through it and go, okay, there's 3 things here that are wrong or don't make sense, you need to go away and tackle it again, because that pushes back your certification, gives you more work to do, could cost you more money because you need to rebook the work. So really important, make sure that you implement the controls, do a pre-run of the self-assessment questionnaire, remediate everything that you need to, ask questions where you are unsure of what you might have to do, but get yourself into the best possible place to submit the SAQ. There is a pre-check option available, which if you buy in, most organizations would get that as standard, enables one of our assessors to do a pre-check and make sure that everything looks as though it is in place and should be in place, so that by the time the assessment, the SAQ is formally submitted, the likelihood of it passing is as high as we can possibly do it. As I said, the certificate is valid for 12 months. We sell Cyber Essentials certification on an annual subscription basis, so it's a recurring subscription basis. The recurring bill comes around in a year's time, but we will typically start preparation for you some 4 to 8 weeks ahead of the recertification date, because we know that most organizations will need some time to prepare themselves. There may have been changes to the standard, there may have been changes to your organization, which will need to get taken into account. So the benefit of a subscription service to Cyber Essentials is that you have the peace of mind of knowing that we are going to be looking after you through the process. We're going to be making sure that you are ready for your assessment well enough in advance, that that's booked into the calendar well enough in advance for you to be able to maintain your Cyber Essentials certificate. Cyber Essentials Plus, well, the first step is Cyber Essentials. So the 5 steps to Cyber Essentials, they follow. Once you've got your Cyber Essentials certificate, you can move on to Cyber Essentials Plus. You could do it the day after you get your Cyber Essentials certificate, but you've got up to 3 months. You've got to have completed Cyber Essentials Plus testing within 3 months of the Cyber Essentials certificate date. We would encourage people not to wait for 3 months, to get on with it as quickly as possible, because that not only means that you're getting the protection earlier, but it means that you've got time on your hands if there is something wrong that needs more time. So once you've applied for CE Plus certification, we'll schedule and conduct the testing. For most organizations, we expect to get the testing done in a day. For larger organizations, it could be 2 days, 3 days, or more. The auditor then will produce a Cyber Essentials report, which goes through a QA process. It's uploaded so that you can see it, and assuming your testing is successful, you will then get a Cyber Essentials Plus certificate, again valid for 12 months, and again on a subscription basis. So we will start the preparation for you some 4 to 8 weeks ahead of the point at which you need your Cyber Essentials certification to renew, so that your Cyber Essentials Plus certification will also renew on time. What kind of testing? Many clients ask us about testing. Well, the scope of testing is all computing devices within the boundary that you've determined as being a scope, which is why scoping is such an important first step in Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. We need to look at end user devices such as desktops, tablets, laptops, smartphones, which can connect to resources inside your network. And we need to look at servers on which standard users can obtain an interactive desktop environment. We don't test every device, we do a sample. So you can see on the table, if for instance you've got between 6 and 19 devices of a particular type, we'll do a sample of 3 of them. If you have a range of different devices, so you've got 4 different mobile phones, for instance, we'll need to sample a number of each one of those types. Real benefits, therefore, for organizations in simplifying the range of devices, standardizing desktop. It makes the whole testing process a lot simpler. It also, of course, makes support a lot simpler. It makes costing simpler. So there is quite a lot of logic, if you're not already in a single hardware, software device environment, to be thinking strategically about that as a direction of travel. 7 tests really carried out for Cyber Essentials Plus, and starts out with an external scan, so that's internet-facing devices and services, any external IPs, and we'll be looking that there are no vulnerabilities. This is vulnerabilities on the formal website with a CVSS score of 7 or above. 7 or above is high risk and critical. All of those need to be remediated before you can get certification. So part of your own preparation should be to run a vulnerability scan on all of your internet-facing devices to make sure that you don't have any such vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are the ones that attackers focus on. There's then an internal scan, making sure that attacks that get loose on the internal network are unable to do you damage. And again, this will look at a sample of devices. And again, it will be looking to want to be sure that there are no vulnerabilities higher than a CVSS 7 or above. Tests 3 and 4 look at the effectiveness of defenses against malware delivered by email and website. That uses standard configured attacks that we deploy. We carry out those tests on sampled devices via browsers. There's no risk to you as an organization. We're doing this in a way that is secure for you, but which will test your defenses. We then check multi-factor authentication. We check the configuration of MFA is as it should be. On all cloud services, there should be MFA in place. Where multiple cloud services share authentication, we'll only do that test on each authentication service. So MFA is tested to make sure it genuinely works. And we also test to make sure that there's a separation in accounts, that particularly where users have administrative privileges, they can't use their administrator account for doing standard day-to-day works. Their email is not, for instance, managed from their administrator account, because the administrator account has privileges which would enable an attacker to do all sorts of damage to your network. So it's important that those are very clearly protected. Finally, a set of screenshots of sample mobiles is collected to demonstrate that those devices are password protected. The operating system is in support and up to date. There are no App Store pending updates, and antivirus, anti-malware software is in place. So those are the tests, as you can imagine. If you have a lot of devices or you have multiple types of device, testing could take more than a day. We endeavor to organize so that we can do it really efficiently for you as a client, so that you're not doing this over multiple days. We try and organize that it's done very efficiently in a day or 2 days, or 3 days, as the case may be, in a connected series of carefully prepared tests. Cyber Essentials, as I said, is not really enough on its own. It's a point in time, very thorough, comprehensive test that protects you against 80% of internet-borne attacks. You need, though, to be scanning for vulnerabilities on a continual basis. In between your annual tests, you need to be testing to make sure that there are no new vulnerabilities which have been identified on your internet-facing devices or services, and if they are, you need to be patching them. You need to be keeping staff continually trained on phishing awareness, and you really do need to have a robust working incident response plan. You're going to be breached at some point. That's the kind of racing certainty. And the point about a tested incident response plan is it means you can deal with that quickly. People know how to report. Your staff know, the IT team know what to do with breaches. They know how to close it down, how to investigate it, how to make sure that it's dealt with quickly. And an organization you breached, you can protect yourself and save yourself from anything serious happening simply by having a really effective incident response. As you take security more seriously, so you need to think about going beyond the kind of tests that live at the front line of defenses and that live at Cyber Essentials. So more focused, full-scale point-in-time tests that go with penetration testing, for instance, both external penetration and internal penetration testing. This is testing carried out by ethical hackers who are looking to see how they can take advantage of vulnerabilities that might be identified in your network. They'll often find things that vulnerability scans will not find. So if you think about Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus as dealing with 80% of the known internet-borne attacks, penetration testing is trying to tackle the remaining 20%, the stuff that is not dealt with by a very standardized set of attacks. So Cyber Essentials, key part of your cyber resilience posture, but it needs to be part of a much more significant whole. So how do you go about Cyber Essentials? What are the things that we can do to help you do it? Well, there are the kind of obvious. We can help with all of the areas that enable you to comply with Cyber Essentials. So normal consultancy advice from our consultancy team can help you deal with what's an appropriate anti-phishing training software, what does a good password management look like. We can give you, we can sell you documentation, we can provide you with patch update procedures, all of those kind of elements that might be part of an effective approach to cybersecurity. We can deal with all of those. But what we also do is we help organizations, particularly with their annual assessment, prepare for changes. The Cyber Essentials scheme tends to change on an annual basis. And we're now looking at a set of changes which are expected to come into place from April this year. We're still waiting for confirmation on a number of them, but at the moment it looks as though there will be some simplification of requirements. There will be some extension of requirements, particularly about server testing. We're not yet clear about exactly how that's going to operate, but there are some changes which will happen in April. And there are a number of organizations who go, well, let's just get our certification done. So if you have a certification falling due before April, it makes sense to make sure that you get it done before April, before the 1st of April, so that you can have testing carried out against a framework which you already know, for which you're already prepared. Even if some of the things get easier, you're still therefore going to have to change what you're doing to meet the requirements. So there's benefit if you can fit it in, and you got to remember that all Cyber Essentials certification bodies tend to have bookings a long way in advance. So the earlier that you get certifications booked in, the better. It makes sense to get that done. But as you come to the point where your certification, either Essentials or Essentials Plus, falls due, talk to your account manager when scheduling your assessment. You can get more up-to-date guidance as to exactly what it is that you need to do in order to meet the new requirements. If you can get certified against the current set of requirements, do that. If it's going to fall due after the 1st of April, be ready to comply with the requirements that will come in, the change set of requirements that will come in from the beginning of April. Our assessment support to clients starts with a very simple Cyber Essentials certification and pre-check. So it's a simple package. We do a very basic pre-check, says, yes, that looks all right, or there's some areas you need to spend some more time on, and then goes through to a certification assessment. The combination of pre-check and assessment should mean that we're able to identify things that are obviously going to be failures before you pay the money to have a certification. So it's a really good, particularly given the complexities of Cyber Essentials, it's a good package. But there are clients we know who need a bit more help, or who need quite a lot of help in terms of how they go about meeting the compliance requirements. And you can buy Cyber Essentials, get a little help package, or a Cyber Essentials, get a lot of help package from us for Cyber Essentials, and you can do the same for Cyber Essentials Plus. So Cyber Essentials Plus Health Check is a very comprehensive review of, do you have everything in place that you need to have in order to go for Cyber Essentials certification, Cyber Essentials Plus certification. If not, it'll tell you what you need to tackle. And then there is the certification service, and then the certification service with a bit of help or a lot of help to help you make sure that you've got in place the elements that you need in order to hit the requirements of the standard, and get yourself to a place where you're able to say to stakeholders, you know, we've done it, or we have retained our certification. And you know, just as a case in point, I think we have been Cyber Essentials certified as an organization now ever since the first year it became available. It's a part of our annual Cyber Essentials process. It's one of the steps that we do every late January, early February. We go through Cyber Essentials Plus certification. We make sure that we're able to continue demonstrating that we are applying ourselves to doing what we tell everybody they should be doing. Lots of ways you can get hold of us. On Facebook, through social media, through our website. You can read a lot more about Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus on our website. Many of our channel partners will help you prepare for Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, or many organizations come to us direct. As I said, I was going to take about 45 minutes or so to run through material. That brings us on to the Q&A section. And if you remember, I said, if you have questions, please use the Q&A or the chat function to put your questions in, and I'll pick up any questions there are. I'll share the question with everybody, and then tell everybody the answer. So the first question was, the new requirements appear to mandate that controls are applied to personal devices where bring your own device has been adopted. Do the implications for privacy and personal rights effectively mark the end for BYOD for the majority of the companies who wish to be accredited? Yes, as we see it, broadly speaking, it does. Broadly speaking, bring your own device has always been an opportunity for organizations to have real problems, because if you enable somebody with their own device, whether a desktop or a mobile device, to access corporate assets, and you've got no control over what's happening on those devices, you have a huge hole in your defenses. So yes, effectively, it does. It means that people can bring their own device, but you should be thinking about a BYOD platform that enables organizations to have your device management software on their device, enables you to control what they can and can't do on the device. They can use their own device, but it means that you need to have very significant control over how they access corporate information when they're doing that. So yes, I think is a simple answer. End of BYOD as we have known it. How do you make sure cloud services owned by third parties are compliant or secure is another very good question. The answer is that you have a look for their Cyber Essentials certification, you have a look for their ISO 27001 certification, you have a look potentially for a SOC 2 certification, but essentially you need to think about, because cloud services could be within the scope of your own CE certification. You need to be having a look at whether your cloud services are infrastructure, platform, or software as a service. You need to be looking very carefully at the security controls in whichever version of as a service cloud service that you have deployed. But it's a key area for you to make sure that you have in place appropriate levels of satisfaction as to the levels of controls that are in place. Are there any minimum specifications of a genuine firewall that can be used to protect a business perimeter? I'm not sure why anybody would want to deploy not a genuine firewall, because that sounds like a formula for being breached. But most of the recognized manufacturers and vendors of firewalls, Barracuda, many others, you can read on their own websites, you can find out what their security credentials are, you can find out in many cases whether they have been recognized by security bodies as having appropriate software. But it is possible to have a look at and identify whether or not the firewall is genuine. Having done that, the kind of minimum specifications that you're looking for in terms of configuration, because it's really configuration that you're then thinking about, are to make sure that there are no inward bound ports that are open that don't need to be, there are no outward bound ports that are open that don't need to be, making sure that default passwords have been changed, and a number of other, if you like, standard firewall configuration controls that you should put in place. If you have a look at the NCSC guidance that I provided a link for in the early slide, when you get the slides, you'll be able to click through to it, you'll be able to get further information about it. How much would it typically cost to go for Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus? A very sensible question. So it depends on the kind of package of services. Cyber Essentials with a pre-check is typically somewhere in the order of maybe £500 to £600. Cyber Essentials Plus is typically the cost of Cyber Essentials plus Cyber Essentials Plus, so you could be looking at £2,000 to £2,500 for Cyber Essentials Plus. That's kind of depending on the size of the organization. It's a lot more than that for a much bigger organization. Those are the kind of prices for a small organization, maybe 15, 20 employees, that kind of, 1 day to deal with the verification of a self-assessment, 1 day to deal with the tests for devices for Cyber Essentials Plus, typically £2,000 to £2,500. If you're a larger organization, it could be substantially more than that. And the way we tend to say to clients is, whatever the cost is, you just compare that to the cost of recovering from a cyber breach, and it's a kind of minuscule amount of money. More and more, we're seeing insurers, cyber insurers, saying Cyber Essentials is a prerequisite, Cyber Essentials Plus is a prerequisite for cyber insurance, because cyber insurance also see the fact that Cyber Essentials on its own is not enough. So, it kind of becomes a way of just simply demonstrating that what you're doing is an appropriate way to deal with cybersecurity. If we only apply for CE and not CE Plus, does that mean we cannot apply for CE Plus at a later date if we miss the 3-month time limit? Yes, that's correct. The validity of your CE certificate is 3 months. So if you're going to move on to Cyber Essentials Plus, you need to make the decision sensibly before you start the journey. We would always recommend that you don't do CE and then decide 2 or 3 months later to try and rush to fit CE plus in afterwards. It's only going to lead to pain. You're probably not going to manage to get the work done to get yourself up to the level where you can pass the tests in time. It is a point in time test. That's just how it is. We would recommend that if you're going to do CE+, decide that when you're deciding your Cyber Essentials strategy. And for most organizations, as I said, just simply get on with and do Cyber Essentials Plus from the beginning. The relatively small investment in comparison to the pain and cost of a breach is just, it's a practical step to do. And that looks like, at the moment, the total number of questions, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll pause just in case anybody's hard at work typing a question into GoToWebinar for a moment. So another good question. Our parent company is based in the US. Does CE and CE Plus stretch beyond the UK? Yes, it can do. And we've done certifications for organizations who are not in the UK. If you imagine that there are many organizations outside the UK who provide services to the UK government, for instance, to the National Health Service, to the Ministry of Defence, for all of whom Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus are prerequisites, it's only logical that organizations outside the UK should be able to pursue both CE and CE+. And so as a certification body, we deal with many organizations in both those worlds, both those parts of the world who need those kind of certifications. Client saying we have our renewal due in 20 days. If we wait and let it lapse, will we be able to submit a new Cyber Essentials with Cyber Essentials Plus at a later date, or will we just need to wait now until next year as not planned enough in time to achieve certification? That's a kind of difficult question to ask because I don't know enough of the reality of your situation. If you've got a renewal of Cyber Essentials in 20 days time, it's still time enough for you, if you can get the work done in time, to say you would like to be moving on to get Cyber Essentials Plus beyond that. If it lapses, your real challenge is that you've then got to fit into a work plan. So if you've definitely got Cyber Essentials recertification due, you know you've got that under control, you can get it done within the next 20 days. You've got 3 months after that to get Cyber Essentials Plus. Decide right now to get on with that and get Cyber Essentials Plus. Whereas if you let your Cyber Essentials certification lapse and you decide then at a later date to do it, remember it's unlikely in most cases to be immediate. You're going to have to not only do the work yourself, but you're going to have to fit into the timetable with your certification body. And the pressure on certification bodies increases more and more and more, which means that it's increasingly difficult for an organization to go, right, we want Cyber Essentials certification today and to get it today. It's much more sensible to try and make sure that you've got it in your timetable, you can plan and manage it. So typically we would say, don't let it lapse. Make sure you're ready, do the recertification, determined to push on, do Cyber Essentials Plus, and focus on getting that work done between the date of your Cyber Essentials certification and 3 months later, preferably so that you're ready maybe 6 weeks after Cyber Essentials certification so that you can easily move into the Cyber Essentials Plus timeline. And that looks as though it might be the end of questions, which is kind of neat because we're pretty well up in terms of time as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, we'll circulate the slides to everybody who registered for the webinar in the course of the next couple of days. I do hope it's been a useful webinar for all of you. If you have specific questions, please do come back to your account manager or to our highly experienced and knowledgeable Cyber Essentials team. We'll be able to answer any questions that you've got. If you have a certification, maintain certification, take advantage of our subscription services so that we worry about keeping you on track rather than you needing to worry about it. And above all, stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.